the Bengal famine that BLevel mentions was during the Second World War, and it happened because the British as well as the US soldiers who were stationed in different countries of South Asia trying to preserve their empires were just like robbed Indians of their food that they produced for entire, like from 1943 to 1945, or even before 1943 they were just robbing food, and it led to a famine that like obliterated from anything between 2 and 7 million people of Bengal.
Mira que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
This is Dinesh D'Souza talking about, he credits India's, quote, success to Christianity. So here he's talking about the role of Christianity, what he believes is a progressive role in India. So we're going to play this and talk a little bit more about British colonialism and Christianity in India.
It turns out that the Portuguese found this conversion a very easy job. In fact, they found large numbers of Indians running into their arms, so that the coercion that they were willing to use proved unnecessary. And the question is why? And the answer can be seen in the distinction between the Hindu caste system, in which you have a pyramid with a small group of Brahmins or priests, and then the large group, even the merchant or the trader was reviled as one step above the untouchable. And the untouchables were, you may say, perpetually cursed, because there was no meritocratic way out of the lower caste. It didn't matter what you did or how smart you were or what you achieved, you were essentially condemned. So those guys, the moment that they heard about this other way of thinking, even if the missionaries were stern, and even if they didn't live up to their precepts, the very fact that they had a precept that proclaimed universal brotherhood, that would admit into the church and into the pew, side by side, the white man and the brown man, the guy on top and the guy at the bottom, the very fact that it proclaimed an idea of equal dignity, this was hugely appealing. By the way, this was not unique to Christianity. Many Hindus converted to Islam for exactly the same reason. Islam too has the idea of universal brotherhood. It gets it from the same Abrahamic root as Christianity. So the point here is this, and that is that although I'm sure, here's where my grandfather would disagree, I'm actually glad that the stern inquisitors came, because I think that while they might have been very harsh to some of my ancestors, it's been good for me. And when I think about the core values that I believe in, and I would even say it's been good for India, the fact that India is today positioned as it is in Western civilization is largely due to the fact that Western values came to India involuntarily, you might say, but nevertheless it has produced an English-speaking, technologically capable country. Gandhi said a generation ago that he talked about his dream, sort of similar to Martin Luther King's dream. Gandhi's dream was to wipe a tear off every Indian face. And the point here, I think, is that India's position in the world economy and India's technological facility today gives India a better chance to achieve the Gandhian dream because of Westernization rather than despite it.
Crazy, crazy stuff, man. This guy is fucking...
this guy.
Comrade Saheli,
this guy's been colonial binge drinking right there. I will say
I'm
that.
glad we got conquered. It's been great for me. So how did your analysis and reaction to this?
Huge talk of Gandhi in order to whitewash, okay, no pun intended, whitewash the British civilization is civilization, really. So that's something crazy. Like, it was, first of all, involuntarily, of course. So what are Western values? So what were the Western values that really did come to India? with the British. So Christianity, first of all, is not whatever one might say. Christianity is not a Western religion. It, like Jesus was Palestinian, so let's remember it. So Christianity is also Arab, just as Islam is and just as Judaism is. All these three Abrahamic religions are Arab religions, and we are these days we are used to think that Christianity and Judaism belong to Europe, whereas Islam belongs to the great unwashed hordes of Asia, of Middle East, and North Africa. Anyway,
And
so
Christianity existed. Christianity existed in the subcontinent way before Vasco da Gama came. Like it's
of
ancient.
course.
So it's like to say that Europeans brought Christianity to India is utterly false. They brought colonialism. I will say that.
So let's say what are the Western values that they brought. So the first things that they did in India, but what are the things that they caused in India? Apart from there is this all this data now about the wealth drain that the British colonialism had done from India. In today's terms, it will be close to $60 trillion. So that is what on which the British colonialism or UK's today's prosperity is built. So what Europe is today, especially what Western Europe is today, what US is today, Canada is today, a lot of it was because of colonialism, not just of African people or the Latin American people, but also and especially because of the Asian people. In fact, if you notice a history, you would see that they had to first colonize Latin America and Africa in order to be able to colonize, in order to be able to have enough wealth and power to be able to colonize Asia, because the oldest civilizations, most of them existed in Asia. I'm not saying that they did not have their vices or anything, but to think that Indians or Asians in general, South Asians, were uncivilized and Europe brought civilization is the same civilization doctrine that is also applied in Latin America and Africa, that these were civilizing missions, that killing indigenous peoples were civilizing them. So they did the same thing in India, in today, in what today is India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, as well as Iran, Iraq, Syria, everywhere, Egypt, all these places. What they did was genocide. They killed the people of these places, like millions, and these British colonial era genocides are either not remembered, or the British would not want to admit that they genocided people here.
Yeah.
So,
What's wild
what
is you'll have people in the diaspora praising Winston Churchill because Anglos said that dude's a national hero, and then someone say I got to check people and be like, yo, Bengal famine, this dude was no friend of Indians, no friend of Africans. He only wanted to preserve their empire. That's it. That's why he was against Nazis. That's
So
it.
the Bengal
Nothing to
famine
do
that
with
he
that.
mentioned, the Bengal famine that BLevel mentions, was during the Second World War, and it happened because the British, as well as the US soldiers who were stationed in different countries of South Asia, trying to preserve their empires, were just like robbed Indians of their food that they produced. For entire, like from 1943 to 1945, or even before 1943, they were just robbing food, and it
And
led to a famine that all like, obliterated from anything between 2 and 7 million people of Bengal. So it was a genocide. It has to be called a genocide. It cannot be called anything else. And it was not the only one, and this was not the only time that
yeah,
it happened. It started from the 18th century, from the time that the East India Company was in India. Um, so apart from like whatever else the East India Company did, they were actually the East India Company that had started transferring wealth from India to Britain. So even like if you look at the documents that Marx mentions in his letters to the Tribune and other uh, those times magazines, so whatever he mentions, he even quotes British documents from the House of Lords and all those places, and even they admit that, like in before 1857, like before Queen Victoria took over the reign of rule of India, like when East India Company was there, even then, the 9% of the then GDP of Great Britain was because of the wealth that was going from India to Britain. So it was before the 1850s. It was already happening, and at that time, the East India Company was not controlling all of India. They were controlling what today is West Bengal, Bangladesh, Orissa, states of Bihar and Jharkhand. So it's a small place, and then up some parts in Western India, etc. So even with a third of India or less than a third of India, they were having 9% of their GDP coming from just the wealth drain that they were doing from India. So these were the values that they brought. They just killed people in those places wherever they went, and they just took away whatever they produced. So they destroyed the social fabric, they destroyed families, they destroyed everything, because when you
Yeah.
have a famine, people would abandon their places of origin, they would abandon their villages. This is the same as migration from one country to another. India is a huge country, so when one is migrating from rural to urban areas, it is like migrating from Central America to the US. That is the distances, and that is the sort of thing that happened and still happens. So people were, when they were abandoning their villages, it was mostly men who were living for the cities in order to see what they could earn. And those who were landlords and people like that, they would take over all the lands that belonged to these poor people, whatever it was, and they would also exploit the women and children. So this was like destruction of an entire society. That was
Yeah.
the Western value that Dinesh does not mention.
But they made the trains run on time to steal all the wealth. And
Yeah.
you know what's interesting in Ewok's community? I forget who started it, so feel free to quote me in chat. But the term in the British, they have the term the Commonwealth to describe the white dominions and the former colonies in the global South. So what we've started to say is the come and stole your wealth. That's what the British did. And I've even seen people in the diaspora say, hey, they built a train network, but it's like, but what was that for? Was that to connect cities? Was that to connect peoples? Or is that like, it's like if you look at Africa, right? The rail lines built by the European colonizers, they're like daggers that stick into the continent to take out the resources. And it's the same thing in the subcontinent. And so it's wild that, Dinesh says like it was under development. I strongly recommend people read Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, because if you have some concept of the subcontinent, just look at the model they did to the African continents, how they extracted the resources and underdeveloped, and you can directly see the same strategies applied to the subcontinent. That's one thing about colonization. It really is copy paste in a lot of ways, and in subjugation. Some interesting stuff is suppression of indigenous people in Canada. Some generals that were doing that in the plains here, they were the ones that were also putting down the 1857 revolts on the subcontinent. And it's something really interesting because Dinesh, he espouses all sorts of anti-Black sentiments in his 1995 book, The End of Racism, which even some Black libertarians like Glenn Lowry even said that was too much. But the term thug, right? You see that term thug used a lot by right-wingers to describe African Americans. And look at the origin of that term comes from the subcontinent. Thuggy. That is a term that was describing the British used to describe the 1857 revolt. And if you look at how that was described by all the British generals, then go look at how U.S. right-wingers were describing the uprising in the 1960s. It's the exact same thing. It's like, why are these people mad? They should be happy. They're subjects of empire. And so it's wild that Dinesh doesn't that he distorts those internationalist connections in understanding colonialism, because it really is a global system. And when you have that consciousness, you can see how it all interconnects. And I think that's why people like him, they are such a negative force, because they try to keep immigrants in their silos instead of connecting with other groups. There's a principle, vertical integration or horizontal integration, that I think is really important in understanding this. And vertical is basically coming to Babylon, coming to the belly of the beast, and wanting to step on other pre-existing groups to join the predominantly white bourgeoisie. Whereas horizontal integration, which is what I push at Ewoks, is joining the pre-existing groups that have been struggling against empire when you come to the belly of the beast. And Dinesh, he's for that vertical, stepping on other people. And it's, wow.
So what we're looking at, thank you, comrades Saheli and BLevel, really powerful commentary. This image is an image of a British quote unquote entrepreneur, right? The people that Dinesh D'Souza is praising. And I think Comrade Obi had a great point. But who actually built the railways?
Yeah.
Who were the laborers? And it's a good point, because when these colonizers go to the global south, they're like, "Oh, I built this." I'm like, "You didn't lift a fucking finger, bro. You had other people do that shit for you." And this is a perfect example of that. This is a real photo. By the way, this is in West Bengal in India. This is a British colonizer on the back, literally, for those of you who are listening, on the back of a hunched over Bengali woman. This easily could have been, one of your relatives, or your grandma's great grandma's. And this guy is just literally sitting on her back.